As education moves forward in its purpose and focus, we're beginning to see more and more emphasis on skills rather than content.
For those who aren't aware, the general capabilities are composed of 7 skill sets, which are supposed to be embedded within the delivery of the Australian curriculum and SACE. When you look at the literature around their role, we can see that the intent behind these terms was to see them developed as a core to education. However, as many of us know, this hasn't been the case.
The purpose of this video is to discuss 3 common challenges we see in capabilities-based design, as well as outline some effective solutions that we can take as a school in order to implement effective capability-based curriculum.
For our first challenge, we're looking at overcoming misunderstanding, which is a key underlying issue when teachers simply don't understand what the capabilities actually are.
For those that aren't aware, clueless-itis is what happens when a professional takes very basic and limited information and tries to use it to make it seem like they know what they're talking about.
We commonly see this in school when teachers take the root word of the capability title and use that basic language to defend what they're currently doing in the classroom.
So the students were coming up with a narrative which they had to write, of course, and they had to come up with the idea, which is pretty creative. Yeah, so I definitely covered that one. What was the other word?
It's a common misconception that as long as you include the title of the capability on some form of document to do with your course, then you have it covered. However, in order to effectively develop capabilities, we need to understand where they begin and end, which means we need to be able to know where a student's understanding is when they enter the school in comparison to when they leave the school. This means that in order to authentically show that we're teaching capabilities, we need to be able to measure, develop, and assess their growth throughout each year level.
The solution to this challenge is to make sure that teachers are effectively educated in the complexity of the different capabilities and what type of skills they actually develop. Fortunately, there's an easy solution to this challenge in the form of education. The Australian curriculum has actually provided a comprehensive breakdown of each capability and the sub-elements that should be monitored at different levels of development.
With an understanding of this, we should be able to see that it's impossible to measure creative and critical thinking on its own. It's too broad and abstract a concept to simply spot in the classroom. What we can do, however, is look for the specific sub-elements of this capability which are much more easy to manage and observe in a practical context.
The second challenge that we identify as part of our process is that you can't explicitly teach capabilities, largely because they're so abstract.
One of the reasons that schools have always been so reliant on content is that it's easy to pin down whether a student knows it or they don't. Capabilities are much harder to put into that context, largely because you can't sit down a student and measure their personal and social capability in a test-like situation without it starting to look like a science fiction movie like Blade Runner. A group of friends go out to the movies. One of them strategically forgets their wallet so the others have to pay for it. How do you think that situation's going to end? What's a movie? Place where you would go and watch a film on a big screen. Well, I've never been to the movies before. Are these your questions? Did you make these questions? These are standard questions. Any question we would ask as part of the Australian curriculum. Well, let me tell you about my mother. The key point here is that you can't assess capabilities in the same way that you assess content. It's not about sitting down a student and figuring out what they know and don't know. Can you describe honesty to me? No? Okay. Well, it seems like you must be at level 1 when it comes to identifying ethical concepts.
The solution to this problem is to make sure that we have a clear understanding as to where content ends and capabilities begin.
The key to effective capabilities-based curriculum is recognising the relationship between content and capabilities, as content ultimately allows opportunities for capabilities to be demonstrated. Let me give you an example.
One of the sub-elements for critical and creative thinking is the ability to consider alternatives. At the foundation level, students need to suggest alternative and creative ways to approach a given situation or task. To put this in practice, let's say that this main stairway within the school was blocked. We would ask the students to suggest to us a few ways that we could get to the building up top without using this particular staircase. One answer might be to take another staircase around the school and go the long way around. Another suggestion might be to get the ladder from maintenance and climb up that way. You could also walk across the road to the shops and buy something to help get up, for example, a rope.
In this situation, the student has demonstrated their understanding of a capability by showing us a particular sub-element in motion. But they didn't do it alone. They needed particular content and prior knowledge in order to engage with the task.
For example, all solutions suggested required prior understanding of the facility of the school. Now ask yourself how this might have happened. Perhaps through an initial tour of the school or an explicit induction to some of the specific facilities. In either way, the student needed to access that prior knowledge in order to be able to engage with the specific task. Without that prior knowledge, they would not have been able to demonstrate the required skill.
With this in mind, what we need to recognise is that we need to use our content as a way of creating opportunities and scenarios where students can demonstrate their understanding of different capabilities. The plus of this is that in that context, we can then give them feedback to help them develop that capability into the future.
For our third challenge, we recognise the fact that teaching is complicated and requires a number of different elements to be happening at the same time.
Our third challenge lies in the fact that we already have a plethora of information to cover each year through the content responsibilities of the Australian curriculum. So where does all of this capability stuff fit in?
The Australian curriculum highlights a number of specific content, and explicit teaching is still very much a part of the educational process. The key to recognising this case, however, is that it's not about adding on extra work. Rather, it is about thinking differently about the work that we do.
In a HASS classroom, all Year 9 students are required to focus on World War I as one of their topics as part of the content. But where we can start to work the capabilities in is when we stop asking questions like this. Okay, your final question, when did World War I begin? And start asking questions like this. So what I want you to do is to describe for me how a teenager in 1914 would have heard about the news of the First World War in comparison to how we learn about current affairs today. The trick is to look at your subject's content through the lens of the capability that you want to develop, rather than just tacking it on at the end. This brings us to the end of our focus on capabilities. Hopefully you can walk away from this video with a clearer sense of what you can do in order to move forward in implementing an effective capabilities-based curriculum.
To summarise our content, we recognise that in order to develop capabilities effectively, we first need to gain a specific understanding of what capabilities are and how we can recognise the different sub-elements and levels of each skill set. We shouldn't be trying to assess capabilities on their own. Every subject needs to create opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge of a particular skill, which is underpinned by prior knowledge of subject content. Finally, capabilities-based learning is not something you tack on at the end of a topic to tick a generic box. It's about viewing your whole subject through the lens of the capability that you are hoping to develop, and to build your lesson plans, assessments, and resources in the context of that capability.
At the end of the day, the only way that we can authentically deliver a capabilities-based curriculum is if we can see it, measure it, develop it, and assess it over a period of time.